a panel. I love panels because I love the conversations. They're always really, really good. So let's welcome to our next panel stage our moderator, Eric Whitchin, product manager for Benzingas. Let's give it up for these guys.
Fuzz. Wipe your feet really good on the rhythm rug. If you feel the urge to freak, do the jitterbug. Come and spread your arms if you really need a hug.
All right, musical chairs.
Great.
All right. I guess this is me.
I can't see anything. We got some.
So thanks for joining what I suspect will be a very interesting discussion. I am Eric Whitchin, product manager at Benzinga, and it's my pleasure to moderate this fine group of panelists I have next to me. So we have, from your left to right, we have Sarah McKenna, CEO of Sequentum, Tom Eck, CTO Industry Platforms at IBM, and Catherine Clay, who's the Senior Vice President of Information Solutions at CBOE. So looking at the title of this panel, that has changed a few times, but the title of this panel as it stands now, How Alternative Data Can Transform Your Business. I suspect some of you are saying, well, I already know it can transform my business. You know, the key there is how. How do I even get started? You know, you're right, alternative data is quite complicated, but lucky for all of you, I have these three experts to spend the next 15 minutes discussing ways to get your organization on track to unlocking its value. So first question we'll start off with, and I'd like to hear from everybody on this, but how do we unlock the value stored within alternative data? And if you want to supplement my very brief intro, you can feel free to do so as well. So we can start with Sarah.
Sure. I'm from Sequentum. We have software and services for web data collection at scale. I think the most basic truth with getting value out of alternative data is to make sure that you have really clean, reliable, high-quality data feeds to start with. And that's what Sequentum does.
Hi, I'm Tom Eck. So I look after the banking sector for IBM. I'm the CTO over that. And part of my background has been in AI for a long time. So a lot of my responses are going to kind of be couched around using AI, using data as the fuel for AI models. But I'm also a developer by trade. So when I think about how to make alternative data accessible, I think of it kind of in just nuts and bolts logistical ways. So first of all, make it easily accessible through APIs or share sample data. I think that's really important. Developers like to get their hands on it so they could feel it and they could touch it. Provide a Jupyter notebook or some sample code to actually show an example of how I can load this data and start playing around with it, maybe produce some kind of graph, maybe even train some simple neural network. But these are some of the ways that I think you can make it accessible to the engineering public.
Hi, I'm Kathy Clay. I actually run the index business at CBO, one of the technologies that I get to lead. It's really interesting because I'm probably the least alternative person on this panel coming from an exchange with listed derivatives and equities and so forth. But one of the things that I think about when it comes to alternative data, I always take a step back and say, wait a minute, because I'm so intimately involved in indexing, and I think we've all experienced the growth in passive investing, I always say, we have to remember that alpha is really beta plus or minus costs. And so it is really important to start with this question because when you think about adding alternative data to your investment process or to your product suite, you really do have to get right to the point of what is it you're looking to accomplish and what is it you're looking to do. Because that plus or minus cost at the end of the equation is actually what helps people succeed or fail in this industry. And so I would say coming from a listed exchange, where you might not think we have alternative data sets, I actually disagree on that, and maybe later in the panel we'll talk about that. But there are definitely ways to extract alternative data out of the listed equities and derivatives markets that I think are super valuable, and I'll talk to a little bit about that in our upcoming questions.
Yeah, we'll actually stick with that for a second. So it's true, the definition of alternative data is really all over the place. It's more about what alternative data isn't than what it is. So I think one of the interesting data sets that you deal with in your day in and day out, Catherine, is volatility. And there's so much power sort of locked within that number. So I'd be curious in your thoughts as to how can an everyday non-financial business leverage volatility data in order to improve their organization?
Right, alternative data, I mean, as with any data, like really you're trying to get to an endpoint. You're trying to get further to an action. And so when you think about volatility data, well, what is volatility data? It's really a data point where you're trying to predict the future price of an asset, right? And if you can predict the future price of an asset, well, you're well on your way to making money. And that's what people in the field are trying to do. So when you look at volatility data, some of the markets are super efficient. And when the bid-ask spread are really tight, there's maybe not a lot of inefficiencies in that marketplace. But there's more illiquid and not efficient assets out there to look at. And so if you take that volatility point and you extract some things around, well, what does that volatility surface look like? So you take a chain of options, you look at where that curve looks like across volatility points, and as you get further away from expiration, as you get further out out of the money calls and puts, you start finding inefficiencies. And if you can take that vol surface data, persist it, you can easily apply machine learning algorithms, so forth, to actually be better at predicting where that vol surface is going to move under different volatility regimes and under different price regimes. So I would start with paying attention to that volatility surface, coming up with volatilities that are better and fitted to a surface that look better in forward-looking price action.
Great. Now, just hopping around a little bit, but so I want to pose the question for people that are just getting involved in what we're ill-defining as alternative data. What particular sources of alternative data do you see as low-hanging fruit for those organizations? Tom?
So I would say, first of all, I would echo what Kathy said. I would look at alternate data as well as AI. These are tools that are in your toolbox, right? So I wouldn't want to walk around with a hammer looking for a nail, right? So I would, I'd kind of start from what opportunities do I have that I think can be fueled by data and some type of analytics that are going to lead to an insight, right? So I'm kind of not answering your question directly, but I would say I would start from a business problem.
Sure.
Because we're seeing a lot of people are frustrated by AI because they're not getting the business results. Well, you didn't frame the proper business question, nor the outcome that you could really assign some type of quantitative metric to. So I would say, first of all, make sure you have a problem that's amenable.
Yep.
And then I would say I would start with something simple, of course. So there's a product that I've been working on at IBM where we right now source about 32 different sources of data, and I would say 2 of them are proprietary, and the rest of them are completely alternative. And some of them they're really alternate. So you might remember there was a few years ago what's called the Panama Papers, which was one of the biggest leaks. I think it's bigger than WikiLeaks. And it leaked the names of people that were involved in money laundering and offshore shenanigans and that kind of stuff. And it's gigabytes of data. So we just took that data, put it into a Mongo database, and we were able to pull out of that all sorts of names and relationships. So that's just a big text file if you think of it, right? So I mean, that's highly accessible, but the one thing I will say, so I like to joke around. I was doing AI back in the early 90s when it was hard to do. Right? It's kind of a joke. But the thing that hasn't changed at all is how hard it is to not just access the data, but to get it into a form that you can use it, right?
True.
That is still an unsolved problem. There's lots of tools. We even have some tools at IBM, but still it's very much an ad hoc, experimental, frustrating type of thing to do.
Yep.
So pick something small to get started.
Yeah, and we're right in the middle of this problem. So, for example, we'll have an analyst call us. They'll see some interesting volatility. They'll have a thesis about how they can pull in web sources to provide extra color. So maybe they'll pull in review data, and we'll run it through IBM Watson sentiment analysis. So we're very easily able to structure that data in a way that they can analyze. And we'll pull in jobs information, and again, we'll run it through IBM Watson, or maybe sometimes it's another vendor, but this is a popular one, and we'll do entity extraction, and again, we'll structure it that way, and then we'll basically be able to provide to them feeds that are highly structured and that are addressing their thesis questions. So if you're looking at Tesla and you want to know, should I short it? Should I go long? What is the relevant information that I can pull around this stock that I'm trying to make, investment decisions around? There's a lot of information out there. You go to the Tesla site, you look at how many superconductors they have, and there's information on how many Teslas are available on the Tesla for sale website, whether they're new or used, how much inventory there is. There's a long list of sites that you can pull from to provide color. And there's obviously, I'm thinking more like 2 summers ago, there was tremendous volatility in the Tesla stock. And at the time we were getting a lot of requests for that information.
And even from the options market, I was thinking about the Tesla earnings just this last few weeks ago. And I'm typically a believer that you can extract pretty good price information out of the options market. Like looking at the money synthetic and pricing out what the expected move in the stock. It turns out that Tesla was only priced in to move about 7% after earnings, and so it moved 18%. After the last earnings. So that was like a really wrong data point. Had you been sort of backing out and back testing and looking at what Tesla typically did around earnings, that was a big miss in looking at that type of vol data that was pricing a future movement. It was completely off. And so I think one of the things to think about is, there's never going to be a holy grail in a data set. It's not out there. And so the combination of looking at, hey, historically, how did Tesla look? Well, I did look historically, and it did move more than 7%, more than it didn't move 7%. So it would have been a terrible bet to move that it was, to bet that it was going to not move at least 7%. But it was completely off in terms of its price anticipation, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yep. This is somewhat off topic, but related. The value of data quality. Sarah, I know you had some opinions there.
Well, I mean, as soon as exactly, I was thinking, are we going to get onto this topic?
I was thinking we go there.
Yeah, I mean, if you come up with a model that's really smart, and you've trained it, and you've back-tested it, and you've done all of that work, and you're seeing alpha, and it's starting to produce value for you, the biggest threat to that, there's basically two things that'll work against you there. One is if your data feed suddenly has low quality, or you suddenly have big gaps. Because if your model can't tolerate those gaps, then you've got to start from scratch. So your AI, your ML, your analytics is really dependent on the quality of your data. So in our software platform, we make sure that we have strict type data validation at the level of every field, of every row of data that we're collecting, and we have many different layers of data quality and data validation that we can apply in real time and make sure that this data is the right quality, and if it's not, there's alerting and notification so human beings can jump in and make a decision. Oh, this website is not displaying the information that I was interested in collecting anymore. I better make some decisions about what to do now, rather than find out 2 months down the road after you've already made bets and they haven't turned out the way that you thought. So that's something that we really are laser focused on, making sure that our software is built and constructed in such a way that if anything is coming across and that's not expected, that you're notified in real time, and that you always know what the changes are in your operation. So we have full audit trail of who did what when, and exactly how your data collectors were configured. And this helps you run a continuously improving operation over time and helps you adjust with confidence when changes inevitably do happen.
Tom, do you add?
If I can just add to, data is, again, it's the oil that powers these models. And there's a few aspects of it that some of them are insidious and you might not think of them, but they can creep in and really give you bad results. And I mean, if you're doing something in healthcare, even fatal results. So one of the things, so it's great that you guys do this kind of data quality up front, because otherwise everybody else would have to do it. So that adds a lot of value, right? If I know that it's coming in with this level of quality. But at IBM, one of the things that we're doing, and I'm not just trying to push IBM, this is a problem that everybody has, but especially as we kind of move from kind of toy examples and POCs and you want to actually industrialize, these are some of the problems you're going to have to deal with, okay? So one of them is model bias. So model bias means that, for example, if it's a model that's predicting credit risk for a loan, it might be biased towards or against certain demographics. Now, certainly not intentional, and that's not even a part of the AI. That actually is a side effect of the data. So what can happen is a certain population, in this case, is underrepresented in the data, okay? So the model's gonna think, wow, that type of individual rarely gets approved for a loan. Yeah, but they don't apply for a lot of loans. That's why they don't get approved for a lot of loans. But the model doesn't know any differently. So somebody might be very creditworthy and get denied. So that's model bias. So that's at the data level. So we have tools to look at that. So that's something, if you're not really careful about, you're gonna step into that one. Another one is data governance, right? Data lineage and governance. So in a regulated industry, right, such as financial services, if somebody does get denied for a loan or anything else, they might contest that and say, I want to see why. You know, why did I get denied this? And the regulators are going to want to know the exact data set that was used to train the model at the time that it was used and kind of the parameters of that model. So you need to track that just like you track you know, source code, right? So that's a second thing. And then the third thing I'll say, because it kind of rounds out the triumvirate of features of this thing we have called OpenScale, I'm probably jumping ahead, but this is also really important, is model explainability. So I've always been involved with neural networks, and neural networks are a bunch of floating point numbers that multiply and add together, and it spits out another number. And good luck trying to figure out how all those multiplications came to give you this number. So that's a really big problem when that's you know, maybe you're making a decision whether or not this patient is cancer-free or not, or whether I should invest $500 million in this asset. That's a really tough problem that the industry as a whole is trying to deal with right now, because the neural, you know, we're all hearing about deep learning. Deep learning has to do with neural networks, and they are notoriously black box, very hard to figure out how it arrived at an answer. So we're trying to, you know, I wonder if that can go back to the data and somehow flow all the way forward. So that might be one of the solutions. Interesting. So, but see, it always starts with the data, though.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
That's for sure.
Catherine, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, I think, you know, just the data sets in general is like absolutely true, and this is the challenge for sure across the whole landscape, absolutely.
Yeah, something I'm interested in, and this really applies to any complex data set that requires a lot of processing, but how do you draw the line between helping clients find the insights and finding the insights for them? I don't know who, Tom, you want to jump on that, or Sarah, or Catherine? Up to you guys.
I would just say that, you know, I think everybody wants that final outcome, just tell me what to do. Ultimately, you're looking at a customer of one if you do that, if you're even able to do that. So I don't think that's actually really possible. And by the way, I think people use the data sets to come for different reasons to different conclusions at different times. And so, yeah, we want to get people closer to an action with our data and helping deliver the data in ways that are meaningful for them to consume. Maybe there's an advantage in actually how they're consuming the data from us, whether it's a bespoke API or what have you. Yeah, but you're not going to get to one conclusion like ever, I don't think, in the data sets that people are using today.
Sure.
Nor would you want to,
Yeah,
if you're running a business.
We tend to refer to it as, I know it sounds a little hokey, but it's true. We call it augmented intelligence, right? Because, and again, I'm a big proponent of AI, but I would not let it make decisions for me. Now, I don't want to talk about self-driving cars and stuff like that, but in regulated industries, again, I'm talking about what we were doing with money laundering. By law, by regulation, you cannot let the machine make the answer, give the answer, right? You cannot automatically, you know, ascertain whether it's a yes or a no for this is a bad guy or not. So we're in the business of providing insights, right? But what is useful is when the insight comes along with some type of confidence score. So that is something that these models can put out, produce. So, you know, with 90% confidence from the model, we think this is a bad guy. Again, this is where explainability would be helpful because of the following things. So, but we cannot let the machine make the decision. You can't do it by law. And I would still be reluctant in anything other than maybe playing a game or something like that. But I mean, where there's money or life and death and other things involved, I would take it as an input.
Yep, sure. Sarah, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we're laser focused on the data collection and making sure that we get the highest quality data on exactly the schedule that people want. So we're much less in the business of providing insights. But we do get a lot of questions from analysts, are you able to tell which reviews are from robots and which reviews are from humans? And we can discuss strategies on that, and we'll propose, well, this is the schema we can pull, this is the structure we can put it in. These are the other data points we can pull in, like the profile of the reviewer and how many posts they have, how frequently their posts are going up there. And these are the data feeds that we can layer in to provide some insights. But we can't obviously give a black and white answer. But so yeah, for us, we'll provide guidance and point them in the right direction of how to structure it. But it tends to be a continuous improvement process, that analysis and sort of getting to the right answer. It's not always, it's never black and white for sure, especially if they're using AI and ML. I mean, I think this is, our background is automation, and we know probably more than anyone else that you can't automate anything 100%. There's always got to be a human in the mix because there are always going to be data cases that don't add up, that are anomalous, but still important.
Yeah, and I'll just say, for those that don't really come in contact with AI, the reason I say that you can't just let the machine make the decision, what really is behind these models is just statistics and probabilities, okay? Yeah. So what happens is when you're doing training of a model, it's sucking in data, and it's just saying, okay, when this attribute is up here, this is usually down here, right? And so statistically speaking, this is more probable than this, okay? That's basically what a neural network does. I mean, if I really, really simplify it, don't throw anything at me if you're a real AI researcher, please. But that's really, at the end of the day, what's going on. It's probability and statistics, right? Mm-hmm. Now, they're producing some amazing results, but at the end, that's really what's going on.
Yep. So awesome. We only have a few more minutes, so I want to put it to maybe some real-world use cases. I know several of you had a few cool real-world use cases of alternative data and otherwise.
Well, I'll start it out just because chronologically, I think, in the index business years ago, we thought we were really getting into the alternative space because we partnered with a firm that did social media sentiment. And we built an index around using signals from social media. And back then, I'm talking, this was probably 8 years ago, but we basically took signals from this social media company. I think they were curating scores from Twitter and StockTwits at the time, and it was very few sources when this first started, and we thought, this is great. There's going to be this huge uptake because we're on the forefront of actually delivering to our end clients where sentiment is showing to be positive or negative, and the index is really taking in the top 10 curated scores for stocks, taking in the bottom 10, and creating a basket of long-short stocks and watching that index go. And it actually performed quite well, but there was never any uptake in it. And so, I mean, I think I want to start out because I know there's been a lot of progression, but that was our sort of first foray into getting into alternative data, having a lot of high expectations about the uptake of people just gravitating towards the value of using these alternative data sets, releasing an index that really never got any traction. And we've come a long way from that, but that was sort of our humble beginning in the space.
Mm-hmm. So I can also relate something I'll try to do really quickly, and I don't even have to bring AI into it. So I think probably most people in the room know what KYC is, know your customer. So when you go to open an account, whether you're a corp or you're an individual, banks and other institutions have to do a KYC. They need to make sure you are who you're claiming who you are. So this is where we're applying some 30-plus data sources to basically create a dossier around somebody. And it's basically taking what all we know in the beginning is a name and maybe an address, and enriching is what we call it. So enriching it with all these disparate data sources, and that I find really interesting is the fusion of all these different things. And when you kind of put them together, it's just, the sum is great. What is it? The value is greater than the sum of its parts, kind of thing. And that's proving to be, the banks are really liking this because they're getting a much richer view of the client. So that's not even involving any AI. That's just leveraging all sorts of.
Yeah, a real estate investment trust, for example. You could choose to invest in that, or you could also just develop all those data feeds. It's looking at, what are the properties that are in the real estate investment trust? What are the for sale listings? Are the prices staying stable? Are they actually moving? Are they sitting around? What about the rental apartments? What's happening with inventory? What's happening with, how quickly are they turning over? Are there any reviews? There's all of these feeds that you can pull together to come and independently make your own balance sheet for that real estate investment trust, and then you can choose to go whether long or short. There's so many examples in terms of real life use cases.
Sure. No, thank you very much. We're out of time, but thanks to Sarah, Tom, and Catherine.
Thanks.
Round of applause.